let's go straight in.
Great.
Forward. I know what the blurb says, but for those who want to know your view on things, what's the story being told in American fiction?
I think that the story being told in American fiction is about freedom and the lack of freedom that we give to certain people to be themselves, and the ways in which, the strange ways in which people will behave if they do not feel free to be themselves, and the strange things that they'll do to try to be themselves, and sort of the strange ways that they'll go about doing that.
You see your directorial debut. So talk about the significance of what it means to you personally to bring this to market, and I guess being able to connect with Jeffrey Wright on lead on this, because I guess that was a colossal acquisition.
Amazing, yeah. No, the origins of this. I was a journalist before I would start working in film and TV, and toward the end of my journalism career, I'd reached a point when I wrote this article called the Racism Beat in 2014, and it was about how towards the end of my journalism career, on kind of a weekly basis, people were coming to me and saying, do you want to write about Trayvon Martin being killed? Do you want to write about Michael Brown being killed? Do you want to write about Breonna Taylor being killed? Do you want to write about this racist thing somebody said about President Obama? And it felt like, it felt sort of emotionally exhausting, just sort of like taxing to say, like, every week I have to write something about this, and sort of the expectation is that this is, it started to think, well, is this all I'm good for? Is this sort of the most interesting thing about the work that I do to you, is sort of just my ability to take on horrible things that happen to black people. And then on top of that, it felt like, I also felt useless in that, like, well, what can I write about this that I didn't write about it the last time that this happened, and the time before that, and sort of like and things that people have been writing for literally centuries, right, about these things. What can I add to this conversation? And so I started to kind of resent that. And when I got into film and television, I was excited because it was like, great, now we're not bound by any sort of reality. We can write about black people doing anything. We can write about black people in space. We can write about black people on unicorns. Doesn't matter. And lo and behold, though, it was, people came to me and started saying, do you want to write this movie about a black teenager being killed by the police? Do you want to write this movie about drug dealers? And it was like, oh, even here, even in this world of no reality, we are still bound by this incredibly limited perspective as to what black life looks like. And I'm beholden to kind of these kinds of stories that were no longer interesting to me in journalism, and yet here I am sort of like being expected again to just address this stuff all the time. And it felt, when I read this novel published in 2001 by Percival Everett Erasure, I realized, like, oh my God, this guy is talking about all the things that I've been talking about with my friends and colleagues for decades now. It felt like a revelation, like, oh my God, it felt like somebody had written a book specifically for me. And then on top of those kinds of satirical professional elements, I have two older brothers. We have a strange sort of trio sibling dynamic sometimes, the way that they do in the book and the film. Mm-hmm. My mother didn't die of Alzheimer's, but my mother died of cancer about 8 years ago. And there was a time when I moved home to help take care of her toward the end of her life. So there was just all these overlaps with the novel that felt like, oh, this book was written for me. It felt like a serendipitous moment when I found it. It was just like I was looking for something, for a new creative project. I was kind of feeling creatively adrift. I just lost out on this TV show that I was doing a couple months prior. And so when I found this, it was like, oh God. And the wind was in my sails again all of a sudden.
They say that, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, right?
Yeah.
And you clearly embrace humor to tackle some of the more difficult areas of discourse. Talk about the necessity to do that in order to deliver ultimately what you did.
Yeah. Another one that I'll say besides "A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down" is an Oscar Wilde quote that I really love, where he says that if you want to tell people the truth, you better make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you. You know, and I think that there's truth to both of those statements, and to me, you know, the first time that I think I ever realized what satire could do, I was watching this movie called Hollywood Shuffle. You ever seen Hollywood Shuffle? Highly recommend Hollywood Shuffle, which is a real spiritual predecessor to this film. And Hollywood Shuffle is a movie about a black actor trying to make his way in Hollywood. It was made in 1987. He's, you know, and it's like, we want an Eddie Murphy type, and it's all about like, you know, we want, and if you're not an Eddie Murphy type, we want you to be a slave or a mugger or a rapist. And just the frustrations that come along with that. It's really great. But the thing that I remember about that film is that I saw it probably when I was 9 or 10, and when you're 9 or 10 in the United States, you're really getting into the foundations of the country. So you're getting into slavery, and you're getting into civil rights and Jim Crow laws and stuff. And one of the main ways that they teach you about that stuff is by showing you documentaries or sort of films about these things. And I remember thinking, I've only started thinking recently that it's essentially, those are horror movies, you know, because you're watching the Klan burn crosses on people's lawns. You're hearing stories of lynching. You're sort of like seeing images of black people being sprayed with fire hoses and beaten by police batons. Like these are really horrific, traumatic things that you're learning about. And like literally I would get nightmares. And then all of a sudden I watched this movie, Hollywood Shuffle, where these people were talking about racism and the effects of racism on them. And yet every scene you were laughing hard, you know? And I realized like, oh,
that's how you deliver it.
There's a different way to like build empathy.
Right.
It's not just these horrific images and showing people murder and bloodshed. You can also make them laugh and invite them in and sort of like show them sort of like the reality of the world in that way. And that to me was a real mind-blowing experience, because it was like, oh, there's another way to do this. And I think that it certainly influenced this film, you know, 30 years later, but I think more than that, it just influenced my entire cultural taste and sort of like the things that I was drawn to. And I think that that to me is a lesson that I learned that I wanted to put in this film. I didn't want to make a movie that was just for people in New York and LA and London. I wanted to make a movie that felt like it was inviting to all different kinds of people, you know, because I think that, you know, I often think that sometimes, you know, I think that movies about slavery are important, especially in a world in which people are trying to rewrite history and sort of write slavery out of history. But I also wonder how many people who are trying to ban books about slavery in schools are going to see those movies about slavery. You know, how many of them are actually taking the time to? Is anybody leaving that theater and saying like, "Well, I was wrong about slavery. I was wrong about banning these books." You know, I think that sort of a lot of those people are just avoiding those conversations at all. And so making something that maybe feels like sneakily palatable. Sort of like, yeah, exactly. I think that may be
the way forward.
Yeah.
Or a way.
A way forward, yeah. Exactly.
No, I agree. One of the scenes I loved the most was Jeffrey and Issa sitting across the table. So much in that, you know. For me, I was sitting there just thinking to myself, two professional black people expressing opposing views, but yet so close together on what they agree on, but so far apart on what they don't agree on.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
Layers.
Yeah.
Nuance.
Yes,
We're
sir.
not a monolith.
Yes, sir.
We can disagree and agree to disagree, and it's okay.
Yes, sir.
Nobody got shot. Just so important, Cord.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. That's one of my favorite scenes in the film as well.
It's an absolute brilliant scene. What was shooting it like? Because I can imagine what you're trying to deliver.
Yeah.
I got so much from it, but talking to my partner, she got something totally different.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I really want to kind of see what people get from that. But what was it like shooting it?
What was it? Before we started shooting that scene, I was terrified, because to me that scene is a linchpin in the film. It's very, very necessary. And so we couldn't lose it in my mind. And yet at the same time, it's a long, talky scene. It's just two characters sitting down, talking to each other. And so that's horrifying to a director, because it's like, if this gets boring, then what are we going to do? Like, if we're sitting here and this feels like it's slow and meandering, and it feels like this doesn't have the spark that I thought it would, then we're in trouble because this scene is so important. And it's like I was thinking, am I going to have to rewrite it on the fly? Like, what are we going to do? But these were all just my anxieties before going to set that day. But the great thing was, and this happens every now and again, it doesn't happen every day, but it happened a few times on set. We started shooting it, and instantly I was like, oh, this works. Instantly. It was one of these things where I just breathed a huge sigh of relief. And it kind of, you saw around set, everybody was like, oh, this is working, And then then I was just allowed to sort of envelop myself in the joy of it and sort of like really focus on the scene and making the best scene possible, because I realized like, oh, we're good. Like, this is going to do what I wanted it to do. And also I think it's going to be a scene that really stands out to people. I think sort of like particularly black people. I think that this is a conversation. I've talked to so many black people who say this is a conversation that I've had with my friends and family for a very, very long time, and the fact that I'm seeing it happen on screen, I've had a lot of people say that this makes me feel understood in a way that other films do not, and that means a lot to me.
I can only imagine what the behind-the-scenes conversations must have been like that just were triggered by this whole process.
Yeah.
I've been told I've only got 2 minutes left, so I won't go into those.
Okay.
Because I want you to share. Well, you kind of touched on it, so I won't even go into that. I was going to ask you to share how you kind of brought together the familial construct, because so much complexity there.
Yeah,
but so much relatability at the same time.
But I think that the thing that I wanted to do. Well, I'll say that's. I think that the family stuff is what makes the movie so inviting to a lot of different kinds of people. Because even if you have no idea what it's like to be black, even if you have no idea what it's like to feel like you don't have freedom to be who you are, which I think most people do, but even if you don't, most people are born into a family. Most people, whether that's a found family or a biological family, most people have a family, and they have struggles within that family and sort of their own issues. And I think that's why a lot of people come in and say, like, oh, something in here is resonating with me. We've had all races and ages and genders and nationalities at this point watch the film, and every kind of person has come out saying they found something. But then also, you touched on something earlier that I think was important to me, was to show that very frequently in the States, and I'm sure it happens here too, people say that they have diversity because they have one black person in the room or one Asian person in the room, as if sort of like that person can encompass the totality of like the Asian experience or the black experience. And I think that what was important to me in that family dynamic was to show, here's people who are all raised under the same roof, by the same parents, in the same class, and yet all of them are vastly different. I think sort of reminding people that there is diversity within diversity, that, as you said, black people are not a monolith, and that we are all different. We all have our unique identities and passions and interests and personalities. Getting at that within the family, I think, was deeply important, because I don't think we see a lot of that in film and television, unfortunately. I think we see, and people are, I think that I had a woman come out the other day and say just like, just the concept of seeing a middle-class black family was shocking to her. That she hasn't seen that in a movie in a long time. I just think that there is this idea that there's a very sort of narrowly defined idea of what black life looks like. And to me, making these characters feel real and dynamic and complex and nuanced, as you said, and layered, that to me was a hugely important part of the film. It's like, there was people who tried to convince me to cut out the Maynard and Lorraine wedding scene, and sort of like that this is diverging from the sort of like main plot, and do you really need to, it's going to cost money and time, and You know, do we really want to do that? It's going to make the movie longer. And I thought, there's no way I'm cutting that. And one of the reasons I'm not cutting it, A, I love that scene, but B, part of the point of the movie is to show these people in their totality, to show the entirety of these people, and not just sort of, you know, I knew that there were movies in which Lorraine would come out and say some expository dialogue and then disappear for the rest of the film, and you'd see her for like a scene or two scenes, you know? And to me, it was important to make a movie that didn't do that didn't treat these kinds of characters as kind of window dressing so that everybody else could sort of like play in front of them. And you never really, and there was just sort of this one note, surface level person. It's important to me that these people felt lived in and real, to give the understanding to people that, like, yeah, these, I know that you don't normally pay attention to this kind of person in a movie, but if you did, there's beauty to be found there, and there's interesting stuff to be found there, the same as any other character in the film, you know? And that kind of understanding of the nuance and the complexity and the depth of human beings is to me part of what makes the movie what it is.
I appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
I know I've got to go. I'm going to sneak this last one in.
Yeah.
I don't normally because I'm good on timing, but didn't feel finished. It felt like those characters got a TV show series.
Oh, man. Please. From your lips to God's ears, brother. I would love that.